My name is Thomas Reynolds. I am 61 years old, a widower, and I live in Tacoma, Washington, in the same cedar-framed house where my wife and I raise our children. I worked nearly 40 years as a marine engineer, keeping ships afloat while my own dreams quietly sank beneath the weight of bills, tuitions, and endless responsibilities. On a rainy Tuesday morning, while the coffee machine hissed behind me, my phone vibrated with a new message. The subject line was bare, just Dad. No warmth. No exclamation point. My daughter Sophie rarely wrote emails. She usually called, especially with something important. I smiled faintly, thinking perhaps it was a sweet update about her upcoming wedding. I had already wired $35,000 to help secure the venue, the florist, and a photographer in Seattle. Another $45,000 was scheduled to leave my account that very week. I had told myself it was worth it. After all, what was money for, if not to make your children's lives easier? But when I opened the message, my hand stilled. Dad, after much discussion with Nick's parents, we've decided it's best if you attend the wedding through Zoom instead of in person. They want to keep the ceremony very intimate. Only the closest circle. It will be almost the same as being there. Hope you understand. Almost the same. A live stream instead of a chair at my daughter's wedding. The words blurred, though my eyes did not water. Something in me cracked, quiet and clean, like ice giving way underfoot. I didn't reply immediately. I didn't argue. Instead, I walked to the kitchen window, staring at the drizzle sliding down the glass, and whispered to the empty house. So this is what I'd become, an optional presence, a negotiable detail. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt awake, and that awakening was only the beginning. What if the most powerful rebellion you could make was simply to stop paying? The next morning, the drizzle in Tacoma thickened into a curtain of steady rain. I sat at the kitchen table, my untouched coffee cooling beside a neat stack of envelopes. Bills, retirement notices, charity requests. For decades, I had treated this table as command center, a place where sacrifices were calculated and quietly signed into permanence. I remembered late nights when the children were small, spreading bills across the wood grain, whispering promises to my late wife that somehow, we would make it work. But that morning, Sophie's message was louder than the rain. I hadn't replied, though my phone buzzed twice with follow-up texts. One read, Dad, please don't take it personally. Nick's mom is just particular. Another said, it will feel almost the same. We'll set up the Zoom link really nicely. The cheerfulness stabbed deeper than cruelty might have. By 10 o'clock, I had made my decision. I put on my Navy jacket, the one I usually reserve for Sunday mornings, and drove to Evergreen First Bank on Pacific Avenue. Carlos, the branch manager, had known me for years. He had guided me through refinancing the house after Ellen passed, setting up college funds, even adjusted my retirement plan when Sophie changed majors, twice. When he saw me, he rose from behind the counter with that familiar, respectful nod. Mr. Reynolds, he greeted warmly. What brings you in today? I lowered myself into the chair across from his desk. My hands were steady, though I felt the weight of the moment pressing on my chest. I need to cancel a scheduled wire transfer, I said simply. Carlos blinked. The one to the Seattle venue? Yes, that one. He tapped at his keyboard, brows knitting. It's a sizable amount, nearly $45,000. May I ask, is everything all right? The circumstances have changed. I answered, my voice calm, almost too calm. Carlos hesitated, then leaned back slightly, studying me the way you might study a ship's hull for unseen cracks. You're in luck. It hasn't processed yet. Just in time. He paused again. Are you absolutely sure? Once canceled, it will be final. And I know weddings. I cut him off gently. Yes, Carlos, I'm sure. And with that, the anchor lifted. As I signed the cancellation forms, a strange clarity filled me. For years, I had equated sacrifice with love, convinced that giving more money, time myself, was the only way to prove I cared. Yet here I was, realizing that my willingness to give had turned me into something less than a father, a bank account with a name. I walked out of the bank into the drizzle, my jacket quickly darkening. But instead of heaviness, I felt lighter. Each raindrop was sharp, real, almost invigorating. By the time I returned home, my phone screen was littered with notifications. 5 missed calls from Sophie, 2 from Daniel. One voicemail played automatically when I picked it up. Dad, please don't do this. You don't understand how much we planned already. Nick's parents are furious. We need this money, otherwise everything falls apart. Need. Always need. Not want you here, Dad. Not we love you, Dad. Just need. I set the phone down without responding. That evening, Daniel showed up unannounced, still in his office clothes, tie loosened, hair damp from rain. He didn't bother knocking more than once before pushing the door open. Dad, he began sharply, why aren't you answering your phone? Sophie is a mess. Nick's parents are threatening to cancel everything. I met his urgency with silence. Please tell me you didn't cancel the transfer, he pressed. I took a sip of the red wine I had been saving since Thanksgiving. Wine I had never opened because Sophie had canceled her visit at the last minute that year. I canceled it, I said. Daniel froze. You what? Dad, you can't just... I can, I said, cutting across his words as cleanly as I had cut the wire transfer. And I did. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the living room. Do you realize what you've done? This isn't just about money. It's about Sophie's future, about family. You're making this all about yourself. I laughed once, quietly, the sound surprising even me. About myself? Daniel, I was told to watch my own daughters wedding through a computer screen. You don't get to lecture me about family. His face reddened. You always twist things. You've always made us feel guilty just because you worked hard. Maybe you like being the victim. And there it was. The strike meant to draw blood. But instead of pain, I felt release. I rose, steady, and said the words I had never dared before. Get out of my house. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me like I had spoken a foreign language. What? You heard me. I said, quieter now but firmer than steel. Get out. I have given enough. More than enough. And I am finished being treated like a problem in a story I built with love. For a moment, he looked like the little boy he had once been, stunned by a world he couldn't control. Then he shook his head, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. The door clicked shut behind him, softer than a slam but louder than thunder in my ears. I stood there in the silence, heart pounding, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not guilt, freedom. What if silence itself became the loudest message you could ever send? The following morning, I woke before dawn. The rain had slowed to a mist, and Tacoma streets outside my window glistened under the orange haze of street lamps. The quiet was almost holy, but it didn't last. By 6:30, my phone began to buzz. Again and again. Sophie's name filled the screen, each call like a hammer strike against a fragile piece I'd found the night before. I let it ring out. Then came the text, first sharp, then pleading. Dad, please answer. This isn't funny. You're putting everything at risk. Nick's parents are furious. We're going to lose the venue. Why are you doing this to me? I set the phone face down on the counter. The vibration against the wood made it rattle like a trapped insect. For decades, I had always answered. I had driven through snowstorms to deliver forgotten homework, skipped overtime shifts to attend forgotten recitals, and flown across the country when Sophie broke down after her second breakup. I had always been a call that got answered, but not today. By mid-morning, the calls turned desperate. A voicemail landed at 3:24 a.m., her voice raw with panic. Dad, I don't understand why you're doing this to me. We'll lose everything if you don't fix this. Please, please. The irony gnawed at me. My presence at the wedding wasn't worth a chair at the ceremony, but my money was worth everything. They didn't want me there, but they wanted what I could provide. And so I decided, if my existence could be reduced to transactions, then I would stop transacting. I drove to the shipyard where I'd worked most of my adult life. The familiar clang of metal, the smell of oil, the shouts of men in hard hats. It was all grounding. For years, the yard had been my second home, though I had often resented it for stealing time away from Ellen, from the children. But that day, walking along the docks, I felt strangely grateful. This place had demanded a lot, but it had never lied about what it was. Hard work, fair pay, no manipulation. At lunch, I sat with my supervisor, Robert, a man with kind eyes behind thick glasses. He had always treated me not just as an employee, but as a human being. He noticed the heaviness clinging to me, even beneath my calm. "You look different, Tom," he said as we ate sandwiches under the shelter of the workshop roof. "Different good or different bad?" I asked. "Lighter," he replied. Then, gently, "Want to tell me why?" And for the first time, I did. I told him everything, about Sophie's message, about the money, about Daniel storming out of my house. I laid it bare without flinching, because something in me no longer feared the truth. When I finished, Robert didn't rush to fill the silence. He just nodded, thoughtful. Then he said, "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't giving. It's knowing when to stop giving." The words landed like an anchor finally released into deep water. I hadn't realized how much weight I had been dragging until that moment. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically. The house looked ordinary, but I knew everything had shifted. And then I saw her. Someone was sitting on my front steps, wrapped in a pale coat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. As I got closer, I recognized her, Emily Foster, Sophie's best friend since grade school. She stood quickly as I approached, brushing invisible lint from her coat. Her face carried a hesitation I'd seen 1,000 times on Sophie's. "Mr. Reynolds," she said softly, "I hope it's okay that I came. I didn't know who else she would listen to. I didn't invite her in right away. Instead, I unlocked the door, held it open, and said, 'Do you want some tea?' Inside, the kettle hissed on the stove. Emily wandered the living room, her eyes scanning family photos that still lined the shelves. Sophie at 10 with her first soccer medal. Daniel holding a fishing pole, twice his size. Ellen smiling from the center of it all. Emily touched the edge of one frame lightly, as if afraid the glass might shatter under her fingers. "She's panicking," Emily admitted as I poured water into mugs. "They lost the venue. The floor is canceled. Nick's parents are threatening to call off the whole thing. She doesn't know what to do. And she sent you," I said flatly. Emily looked down. "She knows she hurt you. She just doesn't know how to fix it. So I came to ask, is there anything she could say or do that would change your mind?" The steam from the kettle clouded my glasses as I considered the question. Would an apology change the sting of being excluded? Would words undo decades of being treated as useful until no longer convenient? I handed her a mug and shook my head. "No, there isn't." Her shoulders slumped. "Not even if she apologizes?" "Emily," I said gently, "words are easy, especially when people are desperate. But love isn't supposed to be conditional on whether or not you pay for flowers." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I get it," she whispered, "even if she doesn't." We sat in silence, sipping tea. 2 generations, 2 different roles in Sophie's life, but connected by the same truth. Sometimes love has limits. When Emily left, the night had deepened. I closed the door behind her, pressing my palm against the cool wood, and realized something startling. I didn't feel like the villain. For the first time in years, I felt like the man I used to be. And I knew this story wasn't about Sophie anymore. It was about me. What if the only way to finally be seen was to disappear from their expectations? The next morning dawned with a brightness I hadn't seen in weeks. The rain clouds had broken, leaving the Olympic Mountains sharp against the horizon. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, clean and alive. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat on the porch, watching the world wake up around me. For once, I didn't check my phone first. But eventually, curiosity won. There were 43 missed calls, dozens of texts. The tone had shifted overnight from guilt to bargaining. "Dad, we need to talk. Please stop this. Why are you being so stubborn? This is childish. Just help us, and then we'll figure everything out. The venue says if we don't pay by tonight, we lose everything. Nick's parents are furious. They said this proves they were right about you, right about me. That line sat heavier than all the others. To them, I wasn't a father, I was a liability, an obstacle, a man who had already given too much and was now being punished for refusing to give more. I set the phone down, poured another cup of coffee, and whispered aloud to the empty porch. Not anymore. At the shipyard later that day, I focused on small tasks, checking schematics, walking the docks, tightening bolts on a crane. The physicality grounded me, each motion a reminder that my hands could still build something useful. Around noon, Robert stopped by again, holding a folder under one arm. "You've got that faraway look," he observed. "Do I?" He nodded, "like you're already gone." I considered his words. Gone. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had already left behind a man who always answered the phone, always opened his wallet, always put himself last. "Do you think it's wrong," I asked slowly, "to stop being the person your family expects you to be?" Robert didn't hesitate. "Not if that version of you is killing the real one." That night, as I pulled into the driveway, the world felt strangely still. The porch light flickered on, casting long shadows across the yard. For a moment, I thought the shadows were empty until I saw the figure waiting. It was Daniel again. He was sitting on the steps, tie loosened, face drawn tight. His phone glowed in his hand, the screen lighting his features in harsh angles. "Dad," he said, standing as I approached, "we need to talk." I didn't answer right away. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and left it open just long enough for him to follow. Once inside, he began pacing. "Sophie's falling apart. Nick's parents are threatening to call the whole thing off. Do you realize what this is doing to her? To us." I hung my jacket calmly, then turned to face him. "Do you realize what she did to me?" He threw up his hands. "This isn't about you." "Yes," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It is. For once, it is." He stopped pacing, stunned. "For 30 years, I continued. I gave everything, money, time, every ounce of myself. I carried both of you after your mother died. I worked double shifts so Sophie could change majors twice. I co-signed your mortgage. I flew across the country when she couldn't sleep from heartbreak. I gave and gave and gave. And when it came time for one moment, one day, to matter for me too, I was told to stay home and watch it through a screen." Daniel swallowed hard, but his eyes stayed defiant. "Dad, families make sacrifices. That's what love is." "No," I said quietly. "That's what dependency is. Love is wanting someone there, not just what they can provide." The silence stretched between us. Finally, Daniel said, "So that's it? You're just going to let her life fall apart because of your pride?" I shook my head. "No, because of my dignity." He stared at me, jaw tight, then muttered, "You've changed." "Maybe," I admitted, "or maybe I finally stopped pretending." When he left, the door clicked behind him, soft but final. I stood in the living room, breathing hard, waiting for guilt to wash over me. It didn't. Instead, I felt something else. Space. A widening horizon where once there had only been obligation. Later that evening, the phone rang again. This time, I let play on speaker as I washed dishes. Sophie's voice filled the room, frantic and brittle. "Dad, please. The caterer's threatening to walk. The florist is gone. Nick's parents say you've embarrassed them. They're saying this proves you can't be reasoned with. Please don't do this. We can talk about you attending the ceremony, but we need the funds first." I set down the dish rag and listened, the water still running. There it was. Not an apology, not remorse, a negotiation. My presence was on the table, not as love freely given, but as a bargaining chip. When the voicemail ended, I turned off the faucet and laughed, soft, almost disbelieving. They were willing to talk about letting me attend my own daughter's wedding if I paid enough. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. The man who would have answered, who would have paid, who would have swallowed his pride to keep the peace, he was gone. In his place stood someone new. What if the person who knocked on your door carried not a demand, but a mirror, The days that followed felt both heavier and lighter, as if my life had split into two distinct halves. The man I had been and the man I was becoming. The calls didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied. Sophie's text grew longer, Daniel's shorter. One begged, the other scolded. I ignored both. For the first time in decades, I was not tethered to the endless pull of their expectations. Then, on a Thursday evening, just as the sky dimmed into that soft purple dusk that only Washington seems to know, the doorbell rang. I thought of ignoring it, but curiosity nudged me forward. When I opened the door, I found not Sophie or Daniel, but someone I hadn't seen in years, Rachel Carter. She had been Sophie's closest friend through high school and college, the kind of young woman who spent entire weekends at our house, eating leftovers straight from the fridge and calling me Mr. Reynolds with a grin. Now, in her late 20s, she stood on my porch wrapped in a navy coat, her expression cautious but sincere. "Mr. Reynolds," she said softly, "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. But Sophie, she's not listening to anyone else." I stepped aside and motioned her in. The house seemed to shrink a little as her presence filled it with echoes of years gone by. Laughter from the living room, whispered conversations upstairs, the smell of burnt popcorn on movie nights. In the kitchen, I set the kettle to boil. Rachel glanced at the family photos lining the shelves. Her eyes lingered on one in particular. Sophie, age 10, holding her soccer trophy, grinning with grass-stained knees. "She used to be so proud of you," Rachel murmured, almost to herself. I said nothing. When the tea was poured, she finally sat, cradling the mug between her palms as though the warmth itself might guide her words. "She's unraveling," Rachel said. "They've lost a venue. The florist dropped out. The caterer is threatening to cancel. Nick's parents are furious. Sophie, she's not herself. She knows she hurt you. She just doesn't know how to undo it. So I came to ask, is there anything she can do to change your mind?" I leaned back in my chair, the steam from my cup rising between us. Her question was sincere, but the answer was already etched in me. "No," I said quietly. Rachel blinked, startled. "Not even if she apologizes?" "Rachel," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "apologies are easy when people are desperate, but love isn't about last-minute bargains. If my presence at my own daughter's wedding depends on whether I write a check, then my presence was never truly wanted." The words hung in the kitchen like smoke. Rachel's shoulders sagged, but her eyes shone with something deeper than disappointment. Understanding. "I get it," she whispered, even if she doesn't. For a long moment we sat in silence. Two people tied not by blood, but by years of shared history, acknowledging a truth that Sophie herself could not face. When Rachel stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "She'll regret this one day," she said softly. "Maybe," I replied, "but regret is her burden, not mine." The night swallowed her figure as she walked down the street. I closed the door gently, almost reverently, as if sealing away not just her visit, but an entire era of my life. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt something better. Release. Over the next week, the calls dwindled. Messages trickled in, each one a little shorter, a little less urgent, until silence reclaimed my phone at last. And in that silence, I found clarity. I began to live differently. I accepted Robert's invitation to lunch without hesitation. I signed up for a pottery class at the local community center, my rough hands clumsy against the clay, but strangely alive. I picked up novels I had left gathering dust for years, letting their stories fill the quiet spaces once occupied by guilt and obligation. One evening, while shaping clay into something that barely resembled a bowl, I realized something startling. I was smiling. Not the polite, practiced smile I had worn for decades, but the kind that comes unbidden, the kind that belongs to a man who finally feels free. For the first time in my adult life, my worth was not measured in dollars or sacrifices. It was measured in breaths, in choices, in quiet moments that belonged solely to me. And I knew, deep down irrevocably, that I could never go back. Because once you set a boundary, once you see the line between love and obligation, you cannot unsee it. And crossing back over would mean erasing yourself all over again? What if the ending of one chapter of your life wasn't lost, but the beginning of the first one you truly wrote for yourself? The weeks after Rachel's visit unfolded like a strange, slow exhale. For years, my life had been defined by noise, the clatter of bills, the hum of shipyard machinery, the buzz of phones, the constant demands that never seemed to pause. But now there was quiet, and in that quiet, I began to hear myself again. At first, it felt unnatural. I woke each morning half expecting a crisis to solve, a check to sign, a call to answer. But when nothing came, I found myself breathing. I would walk along Ruston Way, watching gulls circle above the water, listening to the low thunder of ferries moving across Puget Sound. For decades, I had lived in this city, but only now did I realize I had never really seen it. The phone still rang occasionally. Sophie, Daniel, even Nick once, but I didn't answer. I read their voicemails, their words swinging wildly between anger and desperation. Dad, this is your fault. You ruined everything. Please, can we just talk? We'll figure out the details later, but we need you right now. You can come if you want, but we still need the funds first. Each message confirmed what I had already learned. To them, my presence was conditional, negotiable, like a line item in a contract that could be crossed out if inconvenient. And so I chose silence. The silence grew heavy for them, but for me, it became a kind of music, a rhythm I could finally dance to after decades of marching to someone else's drum. The wedding, of course, never happened the way they planned. Nick's parents refused to cover the shortfall, insisting that it wasn't their responsibility. Without the venue, without the florist, without the caterer, the grand ceremony in Seattle dissolved like sugar and rain. In the end, Sophie and Nick held a modest backyard gathering at his parents' house. I wasn't invited. For a moment, just a fleeting one, I thought I might feel the sting of exclusion. But when the day came, I didn't sit in sorrow. I sat on my porch, clay still drying on my hand from class, sipping coffee as the late spring sun broke through the clouds. I didn't need to be there, because if my seat could be taken away so easily, then it had never really been mine. A week later, a final email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "I don't know what else to say." It was long, pages of text. Sophie's words twisted between apology and accusation, justification and regret. She admitted she had handled things badly, but then explained how stressful planning had been, how demanding Nick's parents were, how she hadn't meant to hurt me. She wrote, "You've always been so dramatic, Dad, but I do love you. I just wish you could have been more flexible." I read it once, then I archived it, because love that comes with conditions isn't love, it's leverage. And I was done being leveraged. In the months that followed, I built a life that was finally mine. I kept working at the shipyard, but fewer hours now. I took evening classes, pottery, literature, even a cooking workshop where my clumsy attempt at pasta made strangers laugh in a way that felt healing, not cruel. I formed friendships, real ones, people who wanted nothing from me except my company, over lunches and coffees. They never asked about Sophie's wedding or Daniel's anger. They asked about me, my hobbies, my stories, my hopes, questions I hadn't realized no one in my family had asked in years. And then there were the quiet nights, sitting on my porch with a novel, walking through Point Defiance Park at dusk, watching seals poke their heads above the water like curious children. In those moments, I discovered something startling. I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. One evening in late summer, Robert and his wife invited me to dinner. Their grandchildren were visiting, racing around the yard with endless energy. As I sat on the deck, a small boy ran up and climbed onto my lap without hesitation, handing me a toy car and asking me to make it fly. His trust was instant, pure, unconditional. And as I made that little car soar through the air, his laughter ringing out like bells, I realized this is what love is meant to be. Not earned, not bargained for, not conditional on sacrifice. Just given, just received. Weeks later, I walked into the community center pottery studio. On the shelf, my latest piece had finally been glazed and fired. I lifted it gently. A bowl, simple but sturdy, its surface a deep ocean blue. It wasn't perfect, One edge slanted, a bubble marred the glaze, but it was mine, entirely mine. I thought about how pottery begins. Clay spun on a wheel, shaped by pressure, by force, by hands that decide what it will become. For so long, that had been me, spun and reshaped by the hand of others, molded into what they wanted, expected, demanded. But now I was the one at the wheel. There's a saying I once heard: you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I never understood it until now, because for decades I had burned, quietly, steadily, without complaint. And in the end, when I was reduced to embers, they hadn't noticed the smoke. But I noticed, and I stopped. Will Sophie and Daniel ever understand? Perhaps. Perhaps not. One day, maybe they'll look back and see what I tried to give them, and what I finally chose to give myself. Maybe they'll regret the choices that turned me from a father into a bank account. Maybe they won't, but that's no longer my burden to carry. Because for the first time in my life, my love is not a currency. It's a boundary. It's a dignity. It's a quiet freedom. And if you, reading this, have ever given until there was nothing left, if you've ever been told your worth is measured only in what you can provide, then I hope you hear this truth. You are more than your sacrifices. You are not a live stream link. You are not a wallet. You are a person, and sometimes the strongest love you can give is finally to yourself.